I never thought I'd be sitting here, telling you this story. But sometimes life has a way of surprising you, and karma has a way of making everything right in the end. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how my perfect marriage crumbled, and how the universe served justice on a silver platter. 3 years ago, I was living what most people would call a fairy tale life. I was married to David Richardson, the CEO of Richardson Industries, a multi-million-dollar tech company. We lived in a sprawling mansion in the hills, drove luxury cars, and traveled to exotic destinations whenever we pleased. From the outside, we looked like the perfect power couple. But as you'll soon learn, appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. I met David 7 years ago at a charity gala. I was working as an art curator at a local museum, passionate about my career but earning a modest salary. David was already successful then, but not quite the titan he would become. He swept me off my feet with his charm, his ambition, and what I believed was his genuine love for me. We married after 2 years of dating, and for the first few years, I truly believed we were building something beautiful together. The problems started slowly, so subtly that I didn't notice them at first. David began working longer hours, coming home later and later. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me vague answers and change the subject. He became distant during our conversations, always checking his phone, always distracted. I told myself it was just the pressure of running a growing company. I supported him, attended every corporate event by his side, played the perfect CEO's wife, and convinced myself that this was just a phase. Then came the changes in our physical relationship. David started finding excuses to avoid intimacy. He'd claim he was too tired, too stressed, too busy preparing for the next big deal. When I tried to plan romantic evenings or surprise him with something special, he'd seem almost annoyed by the effort. I began to feel invisible in my own home, like I was just another piece of furniture in our beautifully decorated but increasingly cold mansion. About 6 months before everything fell apart, David hired a new executive assistant. Her name was Sophia Martinez, and she was everything I wasn't. Where I was tall and brunette, she was petite with flowing blonde hair. Where I was quiet and thoughtful, she was bubbly and outgoing. She was 26 to my 34, fresh out of business school with an MBA and hungry for success. David introduced her to me at the company holiday party, and I remember thinking she seemed nice enough, if a bit too eager to please. What I didn't realize was that Sophia was already becoming much more than just David's assistant. She began calling the house at all hours, always with some urgent matter that required David's immediate attention. She accompanied him on business trips that I wasn't invited to anymore. When I questioned him about it, David would become defensive, telling me that I was being paranoid and that Sophia was just very dedicated to her job. The signs were all there, but I was so desperately trying to save my marriage that I ignored them. I started going to therapy, thinking maybe the problem was with me. I joined a gym, bought new clothes, tried to become more involved in David's business interests. I did everything I could think of to win back my husband's attention and affection. But nothing worked. If anything, he seemed more annoyed by my efforts, more eager to find reasons to stay away from home. The devastating truth came out on a Tuesday evening in March. I had decided to surprise David at his office with dinner from his favorite restaurant. I knew he'd been working late again, and I thought maybe a romantic gesture would help us reconnect. I used my keycard to access the executive floor and walked toward his office, carrying the bag of food and feeling hopeful for the first time in months. But as I approached his office, I heard voices inside. David's voice, and a woman's voice that I recognized as Sophia's. At first, I thought nothing of it. She was his assistant, after all. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. I heard David say words that he hadn't said to me in over a year. Words of love, words of passion, words that should have been mine alone. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my husband tell another woman that he loved her, that he wanted to be with her, that he was planning to leave me. I heard Sophia laugh that musical laugh of hers and tell him that she loved him too, that she couldn't wait for him to be free so they could start their life together. They talked about their future plans, about the trips they would take, about the life they would build once David divorced me. The worst part wasn't even hearing about their affair. The worst part was hearing how they talked about me. David called me boring, saying that I had no ambition, no drive, that I was content to just coast through life on his success. Sophia giggled and called me pathetic, saying she couldn't understand how David had stayed married to someone so ordinary for so long. They mocked my attempts to reconnect with David, laughing about how desperate I had seemed lately. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, feeling my entire world crumble around me. The dinner bag slipped from my numb fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. The sound must have carried into the office because the voices inside suddenly stopped. I didn't wait to see if they would come to investigate. I turned and walked away, my legs somehow carrying me back to the elevator and out of the building. I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I had just learned. The man I had loved and trusted for 7 years had been living a double life. The woman I had welcomed into our social circle had been plotting to steal my husband. And both of them had been laughing at me behind my back, treating me like a joke, like an obstacle to be removed. That night, David came home around midnight, acting as if nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead and told me he had been in back-to-back meetings all evening. The casualness of his lie, the ease with which he deceived me, made everything feel even worse. I didn't confront him that night. I was too shocked, too hurt, too confused about what to do next. For the next week, I went through the motions of normal life while my mind raced with thoughts of revenge, of confrontation, of escape. I considered my options carefully. I could confront David directly and demand an explanation, but I knew he would just lie to me again. I could hire a private investigator to gather evidence, but I had already heard enough to know the truth. I could file for divorce immediately, but something inside me wanted justice, not just freedom. It was during this week of torment that fate intervened in the most unexpected way. I was at the grocery store, mindlessly pushing my cart through the aisles, when I ran into Marcus Chen, an old friend from college. Marcus had become an investigative journalist, specializing in corporate fraud and white-collar crime. We had coffee that afternoon, and as we caught up on our lives, I found myself telling him about my situation. Marcus listened with the focused attention of someone trained to spot corruption and injustice. When I finished my story, he was quiet for a long moment before asking if I had ever noticed anything unusual about David's business practices. The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on his personal betrayal that I hadn't considered whether there might be professional misconduct as well. That conversation with Marcus planted a seed of suspicion that began to grow. I started paying closer attention to David's work habits, his phone calls, his meetings. I began to notice things that had seemed normal before but now appeared suspicious. David would often have hushed phone conversations that he would end abruptly when I entered the room. He received packages at home that he would quickly hide in his office. He had started keeping his laptop locked at all times, even when he was just going to the kitchen for a snack. My curiosity became an obsession. I began to investigate my own husband, using skills I had developed as an art curator to research and verify authenticity. I started with his public business dealings, reading through press releases and financial reports. What I found was a company that appeared to be thriving on the surface but showed some concerning inconsistencies when examined closely. The breakthrough came when I discovered David's home office safe was slightly ajar one morning after he had left for work in a hurry. Inside, I found documents that made my blood run cold. There were contracts with shell companies, invoices for services that didn't exist, and correspondence about offshore accounts. David wasn't just cheating on me. He was embezzling money from his own company and committing tax fraud on a massive scale. I photographed everything with trembling hands, making sure to return the documents to their exact positions. My mind was reeling with the implications of what I had discovered. David had been stealing millions of dollars from Richardson Industries, money that belonged to the shareholders, the employees, and the government. He had been funding his lavish lifestyle not just with his legitimate earnings, but with stolen money. Armed with this devastating information, I reached out to Marcus again. As a journalist, he couldn't publish a story based solely on my photographs. He needed to verify the information through official channels. But he could guide me through the process of reporting David's crimes to the appropriate authorities. We spent hours going through the documents, with Marcus helping me understand the full scope of David's financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. David had been running an elaborate embezzlement scheme for at least 3 years, possibly longer. He had created fake vendors and approved payments to shell companies that he controlled. He had been inflating expense reports and skimming money from legitimate business deals. The total amount he had stolen was approaching $8 million. With Marcus's help, I compiled a comprehensive report detailing David's crimes. We included copies of all the documents I had photographed, along with a detailed analysis of how the embezzlement scheme worked. Marcus also helped me understand my legal protections as a whistleblower, ensuring that I would be safe from retaliation when the truth came out. The decision to report David wasn't easy, despite everything he had done to me. I was about to destroy the life of the man I had once loved, the man I had promised to stand by in sickness and in health. But I kept thinking about all the innocent people who were being hurt by his crimes, the employees whose retirement funds were being stolen, the shareholders who were being defrauded, the taxpayers who were losing money to his tax evasion schemes. I submitted the report to the FBI on a Friday afternoon. Marcus had connected me with Agent Sarah Williams, a specialist in white-collar crime who took my report seriously from the beginning. Agent Williams reviewed the evidence carefully and told me that they would begin an immediate investigation. She warned me that the process might take several months and that I should continue acting normally to avoid alerting David to the investigation. Continuing to act normal while living with a man I now knew was both an adulterer and a criminal was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every morning, I would wake up next to David and pretend that I still loved him, that I still trusted him, that I didn't know about Sophia or about his crimes. I attended social events with him, smiled for photographs, and played the role of the devoted wife while secretly cooperating with federal investigators. During this period, David's affair with Sophia became increasingly obvious. They stopped being careful about hiding their relationship, perhaps assuming that I was too naive or too trusting to notice. David would come home with Sophia's perfume on his clothes. He would smile while texting her during our dinner conversations. He started buying expensive gifts that he claimed were for business associates but which I never saw him give to anyone. The investigation moved quickly once it began. Federal agents served warrants on Richardson Industries, seizing computers, files, and financial records. They froze several of David's bank accounts and began interviewing employees and business partners. David came home from work that day looking shaken and confused, clearly unable to understand how the authorities had discovered his crimes. I watched him pace around our living room, talking frantically on the phone with his lawyers, and felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was the man I had once thought I would spend the rest of my life with, and now I was watching his world collapse because of choices he had made. Part of me felt guilty for being the cause of his downfall, but a larger part of me felt that justice was finally being served. The media attention began almost immediately. Marcus, true to his word as a journalist, broke the story of David's embezzlement scheme in a detailed investigative piece that ran on the front page of the city's largest newspaper. The article outlined the full scope of David's crimes and included interviews with employees and shareholders who had been harmed by his actions. It also mentioned that the investigation had been triggered by information provided by a confidential informant close to David. David was arrested at his office on a Tuesday morning, just 3 weeks after I had submitted my report to the FBI. I watched the news coverage from our living room, seeing my husband led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions about his crimes. The charges against him were extensive: embezzlement, tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. If convicted on all counts, he could face up to 40 years in federal prison. The arrest was just the beginning of David's problems. As news of his crimes spread, Richardson Industries' stock price plummeted. The board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to terminate David's employment and remove him from all leadership positions. Several major clients canceled their contracts with the company, and employees began filing lawsuits claiming that David's crimes had damaged their retirement savings. But the most satisfying part of David's downfall was watching what happened to his relationship with Sophia. When the scandal broke and David's financial situation became precarious, Sophia's devotion to him began to waver. She had been attracted to David's wealth and power, and with both of those things gone, she quickly lost interest in him. Within a week of his arrest, Sophia had cleaned out her desk and disappeared, reportedly taking a job with a competing company in another city. David tried calling me from jail, wanting to talk about our relationship and his legal situation. I refused to take his calls. After months of being lied to and betrayed, I had no interest in hearing his explanations or his apologies. My lawyer advised me that any communication with David could potentially complicate both his criminal case and our divorce proceedings, so cutting off contact was the smart choice both legally and emotionally. The divorce process was surprisingly straightforward, given the circumstances. Because David was facing serious criminal charges and had been stealing money throughout our marriage, I was able to negotiate a very favorable settlement. I received the house, most of our shared assets, and a significant portion of David's remaining legitimate wealth. David's lawyers were eager to resolve the divorce quickly so they could focus on his criminal defense, so they agreed to almost all of my demands. The criminal trial began 8 months after David's arrest. I testified as a prosecution witness, detailing how I had discovered evidence of his crimes and providing context about his behavior leading up to the investigation. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at David in his defendant's suit, I felt a strange sense of closure. This man had betrayed me in the most personal way possible, but now he was facing the consequences of his actions. The trial lasted 6 weeks, with prosecutors presenting a mountain of evidence against David. They showed how he had systematically stolen money from his company, how he had hidden his crimes using sophisticated financial schemes, and how he had lied to investigators when initially questioned. David's defense team tried to argue that he had been under enormous pressure and had made mistakes rather than committing deliberate crimes, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. When the jury returned their verdict, David was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to Richardson Industries and the government. As the bailiff led him away to begin his sentence, David looked back at me one final time. I saw no anger in his eyes, only defeat and regret. I felt a moment of pity for him, but it passed quickly. The aftermath of the trial brought its own challenges and rewards. I became something of a local celebrity, known as the woman who had brought down a corrupt CEO. Some people praised me as a hero who had stood up for justice, while others criticized me for destroying my husband's life. I tried to stay focused on moving forward with my own life rather than dwelling on public opinion. Richardson Industries eventually recovered from the scandal, thanks in large part to new leadership that was committed to transparency and ethical business practices. Many of the employees who had lost money due to David's crimes received compensation from a victim restitution fund. The company even offered me a position on their board of directors, recognizing my role in exposing the corruption that had been damaging the organization. I used the financial settlement from my divorce to start my own art consulting business, something I had dreamed about for years but never had the resources to pursue. Working for myself gave me a sense of freedom and purpose that I had never experienced during my marriage. I was finally able to use my expertise and passion in a way that felt authentic and fulfilling. About a year after David's sentencing, I received a letter from Sophia. She had apparently been having a difficult time since leaving David and wanted to apologize for her role in destroying our marriage. The letter was full of excuses and self-pity, with Sophia claiming that she had been young and naive and hadn't understood the harm she was causing. She asked for my forgiveness and suggested that we might even become friends. I read the letter twice and then threw it away without responding. Sophia's apology felt hollow and self-serving, coming only after she had faced consequences for her actions. I had no interest in absolving her of guilt or helping her feel better about the choices she had made. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, and some relationships are too damaged to repair. The truth is, while I was hurt by Sophia's betrayal, I was ultimately grateful for it. If she hadn't stolen David away from me, I might have remained married to a criminal for years longer. I might never have discovered his embezzlement scheme, and he might have continued stealing money and hurting innocent people. In a strange way, Sophia's selfishness had led to justice being served and corruption being exposed. The investigation period was particularly challenging because I had to maintain my facade while gathering additional evidence. Agent Williams had asked me to document any suspicious behavior I observed, so I began keeping a detailed journal of David's activities. I noted every late-night phone call, every unexplained absence, every time he seemed nervous or agitated without obvious cause. During this time, I also started reaching out to other wives in our social circle, women married to David's business associates and competitors. I was careful not to reveal what I knew, But I began asking subtle questions about their husbands' work habits, their travel schedules, their relationships with female employees. What I discovered was disturbing but not entirely surprising. Several of these women had noticed similar patterns in their own marriages. Late nights at the office, unexplained business trips, younger female assistants who seemed unusually devoted to their jobs. One woman, Patricia, the wife of David's business partner Michael, confided in me that she suspected her husband was having an affair with his marketing director. Another woman, Jennifer, mentioned that her husband had become increasingly secretive about his finances and had opened several new bank accounts without consulting her. These conversations made me realize that David's behavior might be part of a larger pattern of corruption and infidelity among the men in his business circle. I began to wonder if the embezzlement scheme might involve other executives, if there might be a network of wealthy men who believed they were above the law and immune to consequences. I shared these suspicions with Agent Williams during one of our clandestine meetings. We would meet in coffee shops across town, always in different locations, always careful to appear like casual acquaintances rather than co-conspirators. Agent Williams was intrigued by the possibility that David's crimes might be part of a larger conspiracy, and she encouraged me to continue gathering information about his associates. The pressure of living this double life began to take its toll on my mental and physical health. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake at night next to a man who I now knew was capable of terrible betrayals. I lost weight from stress and anxiety, which David actually seemed to appreciate, commenting that I looked better than I had in years. His obliviousness to my emotional state was just another reminder of how little he actually cared about me as a person. I began seeing a therapist during this period, someone Agent Williams had recommended who specialized in helping people cope with traumatic revelations about their loved ones. Dr. Emily Carter became an invaluable source of support during those dark months. She helped me understand that my feelings of guilt and confusion were normal responses to an abnormal situation. She taught me coping strategies for managing my anxiety and maintaining my emotional equilibrium while living with someone I could no longer trust. Dr. Carter also helped me work through my complicated feelings about David. Despite everything he had done, part of me still loved the man I thought I had married. I grieved for the relationship I thought we had, for the future I thought we were building together, for the person I believed David to be. Dr. Carter helped me understand that it was normal to mourn these losses even while feeling angry about David's betrayals. The therapy sessions also helped me prepare for the eventual confrontation with David and the public exposure of his crimes. Dr. Carter and I role-played different scenarios, practicing how I would respond to his anger, his denials, his attempts to manipulate me. She helped me build the emotional strength I would need to withstand the storm that was coming. During this period, I also began researching David's past more thoroughly. I had always taken his stories about his background at face value, but now I wondered what else he might have lied about. I spent hours online, searching for information about his previous jobs, his college years, his family history. What I found was troubling but not entirely surprising. David had been fired from his previous job for questionable expense reports, though the details had been kept quiet to avoid scandal. His college transcripts, which I obtained through a private investigator Marcus had recommended, showed that he had been disciplined multiple times for academic dishonesty. His family had a history of financial problems, including a father who had served time for tax evasion when David was a teenager. These discoveries painted a picture of a man who had been lying and cheating his way through life for decades. David wasn't someone who had been corrupted by success and wealth. He was someone who had always been willing to break rules and hurt others to get what he wanted. This realization was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant that our entire relationship had been built on lies, but liberating because it confirmed that I was doing the right thing by exposing him. The final weeks before David's arrest were particularly intense. The FBI had obtained enough evidence to move forward with charges, but they were still gathering additional information to ensure they could build the strongest possible case. During this time, David became increasingly paranoid and suspicious, though he seemed to think his problems were coming from business rivals rather than from within his own home. He started accusing employees of disloyalty, firing several long-term staff members who he suspected of cooperating with the investigation. He hired an expensive security firm to investigate potential corporate espionage, never realizing that the real threat was sitting across from him at the dinner table every night. His paranoia and desperation were both satisfying and terrifying to watch. Sophia, meanwhile, seemed to be growing tired of the drama and uncertainty surrounding David's business troubles. I noticed that she stopped calling the house as frequently, and when she did call, their conversations seemed tense and strained. David would often hang up from these calls looking frustrated and worried, though he never explained to me what they were about. The night before David's arrest, he came home looking more defeated than I had ever seen him. He sat in his study for hours, drinking expensive whiskey and staring out the window. I wondered if he somehow sensed that his world was about to collapse, if some instinct was warning him that his crimes were about to be exposed. That final night, I lay in bed next to him, listening to his breathing and thinking about all the nights we had spent together over the years. I thought about our wedding day, when I had promised to love him in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. I had meant those vows sincerely, but I had never imagined that worse would mean discovering that my husband was a criminal and an adulterer. I also thought about the innocent people who had been harmed by David's crimes. The elderly employees whose retirement savings had been diminished by his embezzlement. The young workers who had trusted their financial futures to a company being looted by its own CEO. The shareholders who had invested their money based on fraudulent financial reports. These people deserved justice, and I was helping to ensure they would get it. When David was arrested the next morning, I was at the gym, maintaining my normal routine to avoid suspicion. I received a call from David's secretary telling me that there had been some kind of incident at the office and that David wouldn't be coming home that evening. I feigned concern and confusion, asking what kind of incident and whether David was okay. The secretary said she didn't have details but that David's lawyer would be in touch with me soon. I drove home slowly, taking time to prepare myself emotionally for what was coming. The media attention would be intense, and I would need to be ready for reporters, for questions, for scrutiny of every aspect of my life. Agent Williams had prepared me for this, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were very different things. The house felt different when I walked in that evening, knowing that David would never live there again. It was still our house legally, still filled with our belongings and our memories, but it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a museum of a failed marriage, a monument to lies and betrayal and broken promises. David's lawyer called that evening to inform me of the arrest and the charges. He spoke to me carefully, clearly unsure of how much I knew about David's situation. I played the role of the shocked and confused wife, asking what the charges meant and what would happen next. The lawyer recommended that I hire my own attorney to protect my interests, advice that I followed immediately. The media circus began almost immediately after David's arrest became public. Reporters camped outside our house, calling constantly, trying to get comments about David's crimes and our marriage. I followed the advice of my lawyer and declined all interview requests, issuing only a brief statement expressing shock at the charges and cooperation with the investigation. The most difficult part of this period was dealing with the reactions of our friends and social acquaintances. Some people were genuinely supportive, expressing sympathy for my situation and offering help during a difficult time. Others seemed to view me with suspicion, as if I must have known about David's crimes and was therefore complicit in them. A few people even suggested that I had married David for his money and was now trying to distance myself from him to protect my financial interests. These accusations stung because they contained just enough truth to be painful. I had been attracted to David's success and wealth, though I genuinely believed I had also loved him as a person. I was trying to protect my financial interests, though I was also trying to ensure that justice was served. The complexity of my motivations made it difficult to defend myself against criticism without revealing my role in the investigation. During this period, I also had to deal with Sophia's attempts to contact me. She called several times, clearly panicked about the investigation and worried about her own legal exposure. I never took her calls, but she left increasingly desperate voicemails asking me to call her back, claiming that she had important information about David's business dealings that I needed to know. Eventually, Sophia showed up at my house one evening, looking haggard and frightened. She begged me to let her in, saying that we needed to talk about David and about what was happening to him. I stood in the doorway, looking at this woman who had helped destroy my marriage, and felt nothing but contempt for her desperation. I told Sophia that I had nothing to say to her and that she should direct any communications through lawyers. She started crying, saying that she was scared and that she didn't know what to do. She claimed that David had told her I was vindictive and that I would try to hurt her if I found out about their relationship. She seemed genuinely shocked that I already knew about the affair and had known for months. Sophia's visit confirmed what I had already suspected, that she was weak and selfish, someone who was only concerned about her own welfare. She showed no remorse for her role in destroying my marriage, no concern for the innocent people who had been harmed by David's crimes. She was simply frightened about the potential consequences of her actions, and was looking for someone to blame or someone to protect her. After Sophia left, I called Agent Williams to report the contact. The FBI was already investigating Sophia's potential involvement in David's crimes, though they didn't believe she had been a knowing participant in the embezzlement scheme. Her role had been limited to providing David with alibis for his absences and helping him maintain the facade of working late when he was actually managing his criminal activities. The criminal investigation expanded significantly after David's arrest, with federal agents discovering evidence of additional crimes and potential co-conspirators. Several other executives at Richardson Industries were arrested on related charges, and the investigation began looking into other companies where David had done business. It became clear that David's crimes were part of a larger pattern of corporate corruption that had been going on for years. The trial preparation process was exhausting and emotionally draining. I spent countless hours with prosecutors, going over the evidence I had gathered and the timeline of events leading up to David's arrest. I had to relive the painful discovery of his affair and the months of deception that followed. I had to explain my motivations for investigating my own husband and justify my decision to cooperate with federal authorities. The prosecutors were professional and supportive, but they were also thorough in their questioning. They needed to ensure that my testimony would be credible and that David's defense team wouldn't be able to discredit me as a witness. They prepared me for the harsh cross-examination I would face, warning me that David's lawyers would try to portray me as a vengeful ex-wife who had fabricated evidence to hurt her husband. During this time, I also had to deal with the practical aspects of dissolving my marriage and dividing our assets. The divorce proceedings were complicated by the criminal charges against David and the ongoing federal investigation. Many of our assets were frozen while authorities determined what had been purchased with stolen money and what represented legitimate earnings. My divorce attorney, Susan Rodriguez, was a fierce advocate who specialized in high-asset divorces involving white-collar crime. She worked closely with the federal prosecutors to ensure that my interests were protected while the criminal case proceeded. Susan helped me understand that I was likely to receive a significant portion of David's remaining legitimate assets, both because of his adultery and because of the criminal behavior that had occurred during our marriage. The psychological impact of the trial preparation was significant. I had to confront the reality that the man I had once loved and trusted was capable of systematic lying, cheating, and stealing. I had to accept that our marriage had been a fraud from the beginning, that David had never been the person I thought he was. This realization was devastating but also liberating, as it allowed me to stop blaming myself for the failure of our relationship. Dr. Carter continued to be an invaluable source of support during this period. She helped me process my feelings of grief, anger, and betrayal. She also helped me prepare for the public testimony I would have to give during the trial. We practiced techniques for staying calm under pressure and maintaining my credibility while being cross-examined by hostile attorneys. The media attention intensified as the trial date approached. David's case had become a symbol of corporate greed and corruption, and my role as the whistleblowing wife made me a figure of public fascination. Some people praised me as a hero who had stood up to corruption, while others criticized me as a traitor who had betrayed her husband. The polarized reactions were difficult to handle, but I tried to stay focused on the larger goal of ensuring that justice was served. Today, 3 years after that devastating night when I overheard David and Sophia in his office, my life is completely different. I'm successful in my own right, running a thriving business and working with clients who respect my expertise. I'm financially secure, thanks to the divorce settlement and my own hard work. Most importantly, I'm surrounded by people who value honesty and integrity, qualities that I had taken for granted during my marriage. I've started dating again, something I wasn't sure I would ever be ready to do after such a profound betrayal. The man I'm seeing now, Jonathan, is a university professor who shares my love of art and culture. His kind, honest, and humble. The opposite of David in almost every way. Our relationship is built on trust and mutual respect, and while I'm still cautious about fully opening my heart again, I'm optimistic about our future together. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing David's crimes, given that it meant destroying the life we had built together. The answer is always no. David made choices that hurt many people, including me. He chose to steal money from his company, to evade taxes, and to betray our marriage vows. The consequences he faced were the result of his own actions, not mine. I simply chose to stand up for what was right rather than protecting someone who was doing wrong. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, integrity, and self-worth. I learned that love without honesty is meaningless, that financial security means nothing if it's built on lies, and that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing to do. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, more resilient than I believed possible, and capable of rebuilding my life even after it has been completely shattered. David is now serving his sentence in a federal prison facility several states away. According to news reports, he has become a model prisoner and has been working in the prison library. He'll be eligible for parole in about 15 years, when he'll be in his early 60s. I sometimes wonder what kind of man he'll be when he gets out, whether prison will change him for the better or whether he'll remain the same selfish person who hurt so many people. As for Sophia, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she eventually married a wealthy older man in her new city. I hope she's learned from her mistakes and is living an honest life now, but I have no real interest in following her story. She was a chapter in my life that I'm glad to have closed. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm struck by how perfectly karma worked in this situation. David thought he could have everything: a successful business, a respectable wife, and an exciting mistress on the side. He thought he was smart enough to steal millions of dollars without getting caught, clever enough to live a double life without consequences. His arrogance and greed ultimately led to his downfall, costing him his freedom, his wealth, his reputation, and his family. The poetic justice of it all still amazes me. David lost everything he had worked to build, while I gained independence, self-respect, and a new life that I love. The man who betrayed me is spending the best years of his remaining life in prison, while I'm free to pursue my dreams and build authentic relationships. The woman who helped destroy my marriage ended up losing the man she thought she had won, while I discovered that I'm better off without him. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales in ways we never could have imagined. David and Sophia thought they were so clever, so successful in their deception. They never imagined that their betrayal would lead to a federal investigation that would expose years of financial crimes. They never considered that the woman they dismissed as boring and pathetic would be the one to bring them down. I don't believe in seeking revenge, but I do believe in seeking justice. When someone hurts innocent people through their selfishness and greed, there should be consequences. When someone betrays trust and breaks promises, they should face the results of their choices. David and Sophia created their own downfall through their actions. I simply helped ensure that the truth came to light. My story isn't unique. There are countless people who have been betrayed by those they trusted most. But I hope my experience shows that even the most devastating betrayals can lead to positive changes if we're brave enough to seek the truth and strong enough to rebuild our lives. Sometimes losing everything we thought we wanted is the first step toward finding everything we actually need. The mansion where David and I lived has been sold to pay his legal fees and restitution obligations. I drive by it sometimes when I'm in that neighborhood, and I feel nothing but relief that I no longer live there. That house was beautiful but cold, expensive but empty, impressive but built on lies. My current home is smaller and simpler, but it's honest and it's mine. If there's one thing I want people to take from my story, it's this: trust your instincts, value your worth, and never be afraid to do the right thing even when it's difficult. I could have ignored the signs of David's affair and continued living in denial. I could have confronted him privately and tried to save our marriage without exposing his crimes. I could have taken a financial settlement and stayed quiet about what I knew. But none of those choices would have served justice. None of them would have protected the innocent people who were being harmed by David's crimes. None of them would have given me the self-respect and independence that I have today. Sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads to the best destination. Today, I'm grateful for every part of my journey, even the painful parts. The betrayal taught me about my own strength. The investigation taught me about justice and integrity. The divorce taught me about independence and self-reliance. The aftermath taught me about rebuilding and moving forward. All of these lessons have made me a better, stronger, more authentic person. David once told me that I lacked ambition and drive. He was wrong about that, just as he was wrong about so many other things. I had plenty of ambition. I just didn't realize it until I was forced to fight for my own future. I had drive. I just hadn't found the right cause to apply it to until I needed to expose corruption and seek justice. In the end, karma didn't just deliver revenge, it delivered justice, truth, and freedom. It gave David and Sophia exactly what they deserved, while giving me exactly what I needed to build a better life. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, but sometimes its justice is perfectly clear. This is my story, and I'm proud of how it ended. Not because I destroyed my husband's life, but because I found the courage to stand up for what was right. Not because I got revenge on the woman who stole my husband, but because I discovered that I was better off without him. Not because I became wealthy from the divorce settlement, but because I learned that real wealth comes from integrity, authenticity, and self-respect. The next time someone asks me about karma, I'll tell them this. Karma isn't about getting revenge on people who hurt you. Karma is about truth eventually winning over lies, justice eventually defeating corruption, and authentic people eventually triumphing over those who live false lives. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it requires courage, but in the end, karma always finds a way.